Greetings, friends, gentlefolk and deviants. I decided I would make a few little DCS videos to amuse my aviation-minded chums, so I guess this one's for John and Kev and indeed the grim-jawed controller himself. Today I'll be trying to take off circuit and land in a TF-51D, the training version of the mighty P-51D. And let's start with a quick round the cockpit. So there, I'm putting the flaps handle up. It's a bit shaky cam because I'm using a head tracker, more on that later. Next thing I'm going to be doing is moving the hot and cold air intakes fully forwards so they're fully open and setting in 6 degrees of rudder. That's to help me counteract the torque of the engine on takeoff. Of course, a licensed built by Packard, a Merlin engine up the front, trying to rotate the entire plane around its center axis. There's the fuel booster on. Magnetos are set to both sides because spark plugs are good. And there's the fuel on because fuel is good as well. I've just turned the cockpit lights down. Obviously, it doesn't matter today, but in darker circumstances or in poor weather, you can suddenly get blinded by the damn things. Over on the right-hand side then, I just switched the generators on, I switched the battery on, and I've just primed the engine and lifted the cover for the starter. I'm now going to use a switch on my HOTAS to actually start the engine, and when it starts coughing and spluttering, we put the red handle to run, put the throttle slightly forwards and turn up the RPM to about 90%. Now you'll have noticed I started moving immediately. 2 reasons for that. Well, firstly that I didn't put the parking brake on, and the reason for that is that I wanted to get out onto this taxiway before the TF-51 that was starting up behind me. There he is. And that's me actually using my head tracker to look out the sides of the aircraft and look out the windows. I was snaking down the runway there, mainly so I can lean out the cockpit, so you can actually see where you're going. You can't really see straight forwards in this thing, owing to that aforementioned large lump of engine in front. So peeking out the sides of the plane now, just to make sure I don't hit either of those 2 great big concrete blocks that mark the entrance to the runway, ignoring all correct ground procedures, and I'm sure the grim-jawed controller is on the phone to the Civil Aviation Authority as we speak. So onto the runway, approaching the centre line if I can. And what we'll do here is just taxi forwards until we get to a nice reference point where you can actually see the aircraft start to move. At this point as well, I should probably make some time for myself to wind the canopy forwards because otherwise you go deaf on takeoff, basically. Yep, we should see the handle rotating. There we go, anti-clockwise, just down on the right-hand side of the cockpit, the canopy coming forwards and locking. And so we'll stop here at the start of the runway, and there's a few little checks that we need to do. One of the first things to do is to align the artificial horizon slightly. You just stick a little bit of tweak in there to account for the fact that the nose is basically pointing up because this is a tail dragging configuration aircraft, 2 big wheels up the front and a little wheel under the tail. That little wheel actually will be locked to a very limited range of movement when I'm taking off, otherwise we can end up snaking the aircraft all around the runway. That usually has quite poor consequences. So a quick check to make sure I've got that 6 degrees of rudder, make sure all the throttle handles are in roughly the right places. Final look about, brakes on. And let's start increasing the throttle. You can't just slam all the throttle in because the aircraft will start to corkscrew. Probably left this a bit too long. I just caught that before the nose went down, but you see immediately that because the tail wheel lifted, it yanked the aircraft round slightly to one side. Now I'm going to let the nose go sink slightly, so I'm on 2 wheels now, and then the aircraft lifts itself into the air. A little bit of pilot-induced oscillation there. There's no room for passengers, so no one's complaining at me. I'm going to go into a left-hand climbing turn before I start extending on a downwind leg. And what you can't see at the moment is I'm also frantically twiddling away with the rudder trim control to remove that 6 degrees of trim. Otherwise it spoils the rest of your flight, so yeah, quite an ambitious turn there. Just looking over my shoulder to see the runway down to my left-hand side. So I'm going to try and get myself in a path that's sort of parallel with that. And as I mentioned, extend downwind a little bit before then turning in for the upwind approach. The rest of this leg now will be spent basically bringing the throttle back down and the RPM back down. You can see they're both coming down nicely now. Otherwise you will burn these engines out. The two-stage supercharger can make things get quite toasty, and they are quite easy to burn out. The rest of the time is spent just trying to get the aircraft trimmed, which isn't as easy as it seems to fly a plane straight and level. In fact, there's a wonderful little book that that the Grimjawed controller sent me when I started embarking on this DCS journey, and there's a whole chapter in there about flying straight and level. Turns out it's quite tough. Who knew? It's basically adjust throttle, adjust trim, adjust throttle, adjust trim. It just goes on. Anyway, so I'm working my way back towards the airport now. It wasn't my finest bit of navigation, but you can see just about to be obscured by that engine. You can just see there is the runway ahead of me. And at this point, I'm going to be bringing the power back down. You can see the manifold pressure. That's the gauge on the top right. Is now down slightly. RPM set to 2700, which is correct for landing. Gear will be down, flaps down full. And I'm coming in for my final approach. I always get this wrong by about 10 feet. Well, I say I get it wrong. The runway's clearly in the wrong place. It's hardly my fault, is it? The runway's too low. So it can often end up with me cutting the power a little bit too early, which is something that you'll see me do here. So finally, nose up to try to get that three-wheel landing. I've cut the power a bit too early, and yeah, thump. There we go. Look at that. That was a hefty landing. Still, we're down. We're rolling. It looks to me as though the wings are staying level. There we go. There's one wing, and the other one. Yeah, they do appear to be level. That's usually a good sign, but seeing as we're in a simulator, we can afford to get out and have a look around. And there we are. Look at that. Lovely. 2 wings, 2 wheels, 1 engine and a pilot. We're good. So, next thing I'm going to do is find myself somewhere to park the aircraft. I can open the canopy now. It makes it easier to look around on the ground, as I was doing before takeoff, sticking my head out the sides of the aircraft so I can see where I'm going. I'm going to pick a nice parking space and go through a undoubtedly incorrect shutdown sequence. I really do need to look that up in the manual. But in the old-fashioned Haynes manual sense, starting is the reverse of, or stopping is the reverse of starting. So let's just turn off to the left here and park somewhere by one of these buildings. Here we go. So, fuel shut off. It's always a good start. Or stop indeed. Generators off. We're now running on battery power. Cover up the starter switch. And over to the right hand side and set that to off. Then we can cut the fuel booster. Then we can turn the power off. Magneto set to off, ready for the next pilot. Close those air flaps. Just to save anything flying in there while the aircraft's parked. Tiny little adjustment needed on the rudder there just to get that on 0. And that's it. We appear to be parked. So that's it. Take off, a quick circuit and a very rough landing. And now you guys know how to steal a TF-51. Thanks for watching.